Educator William Perky invites his students to an open, beautiful way of learning. He writes this. You may have heard it before. You've got to dance like there's nobody watching. Love like you've never been hurt. Sing like there's nobody listening. And live like it's heaven on earth. Dance like there's nobody watching. In this phrase, you can almost feel the abandon, feel the freedom. Many of us remember that delightful and heartwarming scene in the movie In and Out. Remember it? Know what I'm talking about? The scene where the Kevin Kline character, who's struggling with being gay and doesn't want to admit it, dances with no one watching, with freedom coursing through his body. I will survive blares, and the rhythm takes him over. In our scripture lesson for today, we hear how the now adult King David, the same one who struggled with Goliath, David, surrounded by crowds of others, thousands of others, danced before Yahweh, danced before God with all his might. Music was playing, the beat of tambourines and castanets and cymbals urged him on. Now there's a backstory, as there almost always is. David has just been crowned king of Israel, and he begins his reign by aligning himself with the ancient symbol of God's presence, the Ark of the Covenant. Now, even if we don't know what the Ark of the Covenant is from the Bible, we know about it from modern films, don't we? From modern cinema. The ark, which simply means a chest, symbolizing God's presence, had been stolen by the Philistines. Remember, they were in battle with Israel. Remember the whole Goliath thing. He was a Philistine. But the Philistines didn't keep it long because it seemed to have magical powers that worked against them. This troubled them so much that they tried to shove it back to the Israelites. So Saul, who was then king of Israel, took it into battle, and it seemed to lead them to victory. Then, after they were finished with its magic, the ark kind of falls by the wayside. Enter David. He knows where the ark is. And he believes that the ark is still a symbol, a powerful symbol of God's presence with them. And so, with the ark in tow as claim of Yahweh's power for his new kingship, David reclaims this ark and dances triumphantly into Jerusalem. With a whole parade of Israelites, a scantily clad David dances into the city, celebrating his political position and the power of God that was with him. They processed in celebration and perhaps with a bit of ambition, bringing the Ark of the Covenant to its new place in Jerusalem and in the lives of the people. So, as you can see, this is a story of celebration. It's a story of victory. But it's also a story of worship and emotion, of primal ecstasy when God comes into someone's life. It's a story of David, of a very human, perhaps a bit arrogant David, but a God-loving David, the new king. The ark, the sign of the presence of God, yes, but also bringing with it the memories. You know, all the signs of our tradition bring with them memories, what they've meant to us in the past. And this was true of the ark. It bore the memory of how God had led the people to freedom from slavery, through the wilderness, time after time. The ark, reputed to contain the covenant of Sinai, that is, the stone tablets of the law, the Ten Commandments, was also said to have samples of manna that fed the people in the wilderness. It was also said to have pieces of Aaron's staff. Remember his staff that came to life. It budded like a twig. Symbols of God's provision. Symbols of hope and future for Israel. The symbol of the presence of Yahweh, the symbols of their tradition now, were back in their hands, theirs once again. And so David victoriously brought it into the center of his newly victorious and united kingdom. So, great story for a long time ago. What might this story of victory, of unabashed celebration, of dancing and ceremony have to do with us? Can we relate? Can we relate to David or the people of Israel in celebrating the signs of God's continuing presence and power and joy in our lives? What is it that moves us to live lives of celebration? What is it, if anything we're going to, that would move us to worship with overwhelming body, mind, soul enthusiasm? What brings us to be consumed by and filled with joy just because God is with us? Have we been so numbed by our comfort with somehow the expected, quiet, barely there, somewhere at a distance presence of God, that we forget that the God of all creation, the God of liberation, is with us, individually and as a community? Have we been so instructed by puritanical behavior that we cannot express the joy that does fill our souls? Or perhaps we're so stressed by the pressures and demands of life that any joy that we might have is sapped from our spirits, much less free to be expressed in our bodies. Perhaps we even carry that old duality of thinking that claims that our spirits are good and therefore we bring them to worship, but our bodies are somehow less than pure, limiting our worship to our minds and hearts and constraining our bodies. Or maybe it's that we've experienced such sensory bombardment by the wonders of entertainment and media that we simply aren't moved. Our emotions and spirits aren't lifted to delight in the realization that God is with us. How satisfying it would be. How it would build our own sense of well-being, I think, as individuals and as a church, to have our souls stirred to the place where we could dance before God as if no one is watching, with abandon and pleasure. Let's look carefully at the story. There's some clues about what this could mean for us. The first, the people of God had experienced something taken away from them. They had their traditions, their signs of God's presence taken from them. I'm sure they wondered if God, therefore, had abandoned them, or perhaps other gods were more powerful than theirs. I don't know about you, but as a liberal, progressive Christian, I can relate. The vocabulary and symbols of our faith have been co-opted, taken from us by bigoted fundamentalists. And so they mean something different. When you're watching television and all of a sudden you see the sign of a cross, what do you think? You don't think liberal Christians, do you? The cross, the sign of Jesus' kinship with the last and least, the sign of Jesus' self-giving love, has been stolen and used as a weapon of exclusion and manipulation. And so I would suggest that if we can reclaim the liberality of its meaning, perhaps we could celebrate. Perhaps we too could dance before God and claim God's presence with the symbols of our tradition fully intact and for us. Second thing, before the victory dance, David performed a sacrifice to God. He offered gifts, recognizing that without God, liberation and unity would not be theirs. Getting clear, my friends, about what it is that God does in us and for us may just lead us to a display of emotion as well. I'm sure you are like me in this way. I love to hear stories of those who have experienced dramatic shifts in their lives. Those who get well after a difficult illness. Those who find sobriety after years of addiction. those who experience a financial breakthrough when they've struggled to barely make ends meet. Those in these positions get it right, even if it's for just a moment. They see clearly that something beyond themselves has pulled them through. And joy and gratitude exude from them with contagious fire. You know what I mean? Stories of God intervening brings us to gratitude, to a place where we want to say thank you with every fiber of our being. Third, most of us know how it feels to be free. Free from something. Free from the demons of our past. Free from resentment. Free from debilitating worry. We know what that freedom feels like. But we forget, I think, to connect that to our worship. To remember the source of our freedom and liberation with gratitude and joy. Joy. It's one of the signs of the Spirit, what the Scriptures call the fruit of the Spirit. For even a moment, can we throw off the shackles of worry, of preoccupation, of you have to be solemn at church notions of holiness, and dance before God this morning like no one is watching, with gratitude and connection. Now, it's interesting to note, it was translated differently in our scripture for today. It's interesting to note that David only wore what's called a linen ephod as he danced. Now, the ephod it's doubtful about what it means. It can either be a small linen apron, which is how it was translated today, which is used for ceremonial occasions, or it could be priestly vestments, something that a leader in the synagogue wore. Some commentators suggest that it's the equivalent of a modern G-string. Regardless, whatever a linen ephod is, that's what David wore. His wife was not amused. She may have seen this display as unseemly for a king, or she may have seen it as David's arrogance in claiming his kingship as an act of God. But David dances boldly and bodily, stripped of all except his gratitude, his bold intentions, and his love of God, adorned only with a linen ephod, whatever that is, and with the body which God created and his royal leadership. Are we clothed for celebration this morning? Are our bodies attuned with the Spirit, adorned with gratitude, with bold intentions, and with the love of God? So when David had finished offering his burnt offerings, the offerings of well-being, he turns to the people and he blesses them. Then he gives this food that was offered to God to them to eat. In a way, they celebrated a form of something like communion. They gave thanks to God and ate the food of sacrifice. All were included in this feast that God had provided. All were empowered by this heaven meets earth food. All were energized at this table of joy and gratitude. In many ways, a primal worship service had taken place. God was acknowledged as the source. The presence of God in the past and in the present was celebrated. The relevance of God in their own lives exploded in singing and joy. There was music, gifts were offered to God. The people celebrated without shame, even when some looked on with disapproval. They shared a communion meal that was filled and touched by the Spirit. My hope is that something like that can happen for us, here and now. Have we come to celebrate today as well as to seek God's guidance? Is joy a part of our worship as much as meditation? I believe that celebration comes with gratitude. And when we are open to receive, to take in the presence of the Spirit, when we're willing to throw off anything that would hold us back, that would keep us from experiencing joy, when we're ready to lose, even if it's just for a moment, when we're ready to lose our doubt, our negativity, our suspicion, our greed, our worry, our anxiety, our guilt, and breathe in the love of God for us in this moment. Are you ready to dance? Are you ready to see clearly, even in this moment, what God has done for you? Are you ready to be grateful? What is it that makes your heart overflow with joy today? Can you think about it? Let it be foremost in your mind before anything else, before any worry or concern. Can you express that to God with your voice, with your intellect, with your emotions, and with your body? Can we celebrate with one another today? Celebrating one another's joys as well in music and dance. You got to dance like no one is watching. Love like you'll never be hurt. Sing like there's nobody listening. And live like it's heaven on earth. With freedom coursing through his body, I will survive blares, and the rhythm takes him over. In our scripture lesson for today, we hear how the now adult King David, the same one who struggled with Goliath, David, surrounded by crowds of others, thousands of others. You may have heard it before. You've got to dance like there's nobody watching. Love like you've never been hurt. Sing like there's nobody listening. And live like it's heaven on earth. Dance like there's nobody watching. In this phrase, you can almost feel the abandon. Educator William Perky invites his students to an open, beautiful way of learning. He writes this: danced before Yahweh, danced before God with all his might. Music was playing, the beat of tambourines and castanets and cymbals urged him on. Now there's a backstory, as there almost always is. David has just been crowned king of Israel, and he begins to feel the freedom. Many of us remember that delightful and heartwarming scene in the movie In and Out. Remember it? Know what I'm talking about? The scene where the Kevin Kline character, who's struggling with being gay and doesn't want to admit it, dances with no one watching